I got a call into the office about a disturbance.
The family was murdered.
Shooter's on travelable ground.
You can't keep your own office going, but you're going to run mine. They're your streets to keep safe.
Ted Garcia. The man is simply evil.
Can we shut this bitch up?
You want things simple and neat.
There were some allegations made.
Allegations like what?
You were in his house.
Well, here's
I have motive, but we need evidence.
People are going to be looking here now.
He's aggressive, he's dangerous, he needs to be locked up.
He's been spying this whole time.
Have you ever wondered what would happen if one ordinary town suddenly became a battlefield for politics, fear, rumors, social media, and human emotions? Imagine waking up one morning believing everything around you is normal, only to realize that your neighbors no longer trust each other, friendships begin to fall apart, and even the smallest disagreement can change someone's life forever. That is exactly the terrifying reality that Eddington explores. This is not a movie filled with monsters hiding in dark forests or ghosts haunting old houses. Instead, it shows something even scarier: how ordinary people can slowly become trapped by fear, misinformation, power, and anger. That is what makes Eddington one of the most unique and talked about films of 2025. Directed and written by Ari Aster, the filmmaker behind Hereditary, Midsommar, and Beau is Afraid, Eddington marks another bold step in his career. Instead of making a traditional horror movie, Aster combines satire, psychological tension, political drama, dark comedy, and modern Western storytelling into one unforgettable experience. Set during May 2020 in the fictional town of Eddington, New Mexico, the film follows a bitter conflict between Sheriff Joe Cross and Mayor Ted Garcia. What begins as a disagreement over local leadership slowly grows into something much larger, exposing deep divisions inside the community during the COVID-19 pandemic and the nationwide unrest following the death of George Floyd. One of the reasons audiences became so interested in the film long before its release was the incredible cast. Joaquin Phoenix plays Sheriff Joe Cross, delivering another emotionally layered performance after previously working with Ari Aster on Beau is Afraid. Pedro Pascal takes on the role of Mayor Ted Garcia, creating an intense rivalry that becomes the emotional center of the story. Emma Stone appears in a dramatic supporting role alongside Austin Butler, Michael Wood, Luke Grimes, Deirdre O'Connell, Emily Hofferley, Clifton Collins Jr., and William Bello. Every actor brings a different perspective to the story, making the town feel like a real community instead of just a movie set. One interesting fact is that many people expected Ari Aster to make another pure horror film after the success of Hereditary and Midsommar. Instead, he surprised everyone by creating a modern western mixed with political satire and psychological suspense. The result is a movie that doesn't rely on jump scares. Instead, it creates discomfort through conversations, misunderstandings, conspiracy theories, and the gradual breakdown of trust between ordinary citizens. This change in style divided audiences, but it also proved that Aster was willing to experiment rather than repeat himself. The development of Eddington reportedly began with Ari Aster wanting to capture the emotional chaos of 2020 rather than simply recreate historical events. Instead of making a documentary-style drama, He built a fictional town where every major issue of that period could collide. The COVID 19 pandemic, political polarization, misinformation, protests, internet conspiracy theories, and personal ambition all become part of one interconnected story. Rather than presenting easy answers, the screenplay asks viewers difficult questions about how fear changes human behavior and how quickly communities can become divided when people stop listening to one another. The screenplay itself is one of the film's biggest strengths. Ari Aster carefully avoids creating simple heroes and villains. Sheriff Joe Cross believes he is protecting his town, while Mayor Ted Garcia believes his decisions are necessary for public safety and the future of Eddington. Both men think they are acting responsibly, but their personal pride and political rivalry slowly push the town toward chaos. As the conflict grows, ordinary citizens are forced to choose sides, and even families begin to disagree. This moral complexity is what separates Eddington from a typical political thriller. Every character believes they are right, making the audience constantly question who deserves sympathy. Casting Joaquin Phoenix was particularly important because his acting style fits emotionally complicated characters. Rather than using dramatic speeches, Phoenix often communicates through silence, facial expressions, and body language. His version of Sheriff Joe Cross feels like a man carrying years of frustration beneath the surface. Even when he says very little, the audience can sense his emotional conflict. Pedro Pascal approaches Mayor Ted Garcia differently. He presents confidence, intelligence, and political charisma, but subtle moments reveal the enormous pressure placed on his character. Watching these two actors share the screen becomes one of the film's greatest pleasures because neither performance tries to dominate the other. Instead, their personalities naturally clash, making every conversation feel unpredictable. Emma Stone's role may not receive as much attention in marketing, but her performance adds emotional depth to the story. Rather than existing simply to support other characters, she represents the personal consequences of the town's growing conflict. Her scenes remind viewers that political battles affect real families and real relationships. Austin Butler also delivers a memorable supporting performance, bringing mystery and unpredictability whenever he appears on screen. Together, the ensemble cast creates a believable community where every resident has personal fears, dreams, and motivations. Filming took place primarily in New Mexico, allowing the production to capture the wide open landscapes and small town atmosphere essential to the story. Ori Aster intentionally uses these beautiful locations as a contrast to the emotional tension between the characters. The empty roads, quiet neighborhoods, and desert landscapes create an unusual feeling of isolation. Even though the town appears peaceful, audiences constantly sense that something dangerous is growing beneath the surface. Cinematographer Darius Konji uses long shots, natural lighting, and carefully composed frames to emphasize loneliness and emotional distance between characters. Every image feels carefully planned, turning the environment into another character within the story. Perhaps one of the most fascinating production decisions involved the movie's visual style. Unlike many modern thrillers filled with rapid editing, Eddington often allows scenes to unfold slowly. The camera patiently observes conversations instead of rushing through them. This slower pacing encourages audiences to pay attention to every facial expression, every pause, and every subtle change in emotion. Small details hidden in the background often become meaningful later, rewarding viewers who pay close attention. Many fans have already pointed out that the movie becomes even richer during a second viewing because earlier scenes contain clues that only make sense after the ending. The music also deserves special recognition. Ari Aster reunited with Bobby Krullick, who previously worked on Midsommar and Bo is Afraid, while Daniel Pemberton joined the project as co-composer. Instead of filling every scene with loud orchestral music, the score often remains restrained, allowing silence to create tension. When music finally appears, it quietly reflects the emotional state of the characters rather than simply announcing danger. This subtle approach helps maintain the realistic atmosphere that defines the entire film. Interesting fact, the film premiered in competition at the 2025 Cannes Film Festival before its theatrical release by A24. Its premiere immediately sparked strong debate among critics. Some praised Ari Aster's fearless social commentary and ambitious filmmaking, while others felt the film's unusual blend of satire, western, and psychological drama made it intentionally challenging. Regardless of opinion, almost everyone agreed that Eddington was one of the most discussed films of the festival, proving once again that Ari Aster isn't interested in making safe or predictable movies. The more people began talking about Eddington, the more it became clear that this was never meant to be a simple story about politics or the pandemic. Ari Aster uses the fictional town as a mirror for modern society. Every street, every conversation, and every disagreement represents something much larger than the people involved. At first glance, Eddington looks like a quiet American town where everyone knows each other. The roads are empty, local businesses seem ordinary, and life appears peaceful. But beneath that calm surface, frustration has been building for years. The arrival of the COVID 19 pandemic doesn't create these problems, it simply exposes them. Long hidden fears, personal grudges, political differences, and social tensions suddenly rise to the surface. Instead of showing one single villain responsible for everything, the movie suggests that fear itself becomes the most dangerous force. Once fear enters a community, trust begins to disappear. Friends question one another, neighbors stop believing each other, and every piece of information is treated with suspicion. This emotional atmosphere is what gives the film its unique identity. One of the strongest achievements of the screenplay is its realistic dialogue. In many political dramas, characters deliver long speeches explaining their beliefs, but Eddington avoids this style. Conversations feel messy, emotional, and natural. People interrupt each other, misunderstand each other, and often leave important thoughts unfinished. This makes every interaction feel authentic because real life rarely follows perfect dramatic structure. Ari Aster allows uncomfortable silence to become part of the storytelling. Sometimes the most important moment in a scene isn't what someone says, but what they choose not to say. Joaquin Phoenix especially excels in these quiet moments. His character frequently communicates frustration through small gestures, avoiding eye contact or pausing before answering difficult questions. These tiny details create emotional depth that cannot be achieved through dialogue alone. Pedro Pascal responds with a completely different energy. His mayor is confident in public but noticeably more vulnerable when facing private decisions. Watching these two characters slowly drift from professional disagreement into personal conflict becomes one of the film's greatest pleasures. Another fascinating element is the way social media influences nearly every major event in the story. Rather than treating the internet as simple background noise, Eddington presents online platforms as powerful forces capable of shaping reality. Rumors spread faster than facts. Half truths become accepted as complete truth. A short video without context changes public opinion overnight. Ordinary people suddenly become local celebrities or public enemies depending on what appears online. Ari Aster doesn't blame technology itself but instead explores how people choose to use it. The movie asks an important question: what happens when emotions spread faster than verified information? This question becomes increasingly relevant as the conflict inside the town grows more dangerous. Viewers may find themselves recognizing situations similar to events they have witnessed in real life over the past few years, making the story feel surprisingly personal. The cinematography deserves equal praise because every frame appears carefully designed to support the film's emotional themes. Darius Konji uses wide shots to remind audiences how isolated the town is. Endless desert landscapes surround the community, creating a feeling that there is nowhere to escape. At the same time, close up shots become increasingly intimate as emotions intensify. During important confrontations, the camera often remains steady instead of moving dramatically. This stillness forces viewers to concentrate entirely on facial expressions and body language. Rather than distracting audiences with flashy camera movements, the cinematography allows performances to remain at the center of attention. Natural lighting also plays a significant role. Bright daylight often accompanies emotionally uncomfortable scenes, proving that danger doesn't always exist in darkness. Some of the film's most unsettling moments happen under clear blue skies, making the emotional conflict feel even more realistic. Production designers paid remarkable attention to creating a believable small town environment. Every location tells part of the story. The sheriff's office reflects practicality and routine, while the mayor's workspace communicates organization and political responsibility. Local shops, family homes, community buildings, and empty streets all contribute to the feeling that Eddington has existed long before the movie begins. Nothing feels artificially constructed for dramatic effect. Background details reward careful viewers, election posters, handwritten notices, newspaper headlines, masks hanging inside vehicles, and television broadcast quietly reinforce the historical setting without constantly reminding the audience of it. These details never overwhelm the story but instead create an immersive world where every object appears to belong naturally. Costume design follows the same philosophy of realism. Characters dress according to their personalities rather than fashion trends. Sheriff Joe Cross wears practical clothing that reflects years of service and experience. Mayor Ted Garcia appears more polished, reinforcing his public image as a political leader. Emma Stone's wardrobe gradually changes alongside her emotional journey, subtly reflecting internal struggles without drawing unnecessary attention. Supporting characters also receive thoughtful costume choices that help define their social roles and personal backgrounds. This commitment to authenticity helps audiences forget they are watching actors and instead believe they are observing real people living through extraordinary circumstances. Music continues to shape the emotional experience without dominating it. Bobby Kurlick and Daniel Pemberton avoid creating obvious heroic or villainous themes. Instead, the score quietly follows emotional uncertainty. Gentle electronic textures blend with orchestral elements to produce an atmosphere that feels unsettling without becoming overwhelming. Silence often becomes just as powerful as music. Some scenes unfold with almost no soundtrack at all, forcing viewers to focus entirely on breathing, footsteps, distant traffic, or natural environmental sounds. This careful use of audio creates tension that feels organic rather than manipulated. When the score finally grows stronger during major turning points, its emotional impact becomes much greater because it has been used so sparingly throughout the film. Following its premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, Eddington immediately became one of the most discussed movies of the year. Critics praised Ari Aster's willingness to tackle complicated modern issues through fictional storytelling rather than direct historical recreation. Many reviews highlighted Joaquin Phoenix's deeply committed performance, describing it as another example of his remarkable ability to portray emotionally conflicted characters. Pedro Pascal also received widespread praise for creating a mayor who felt intelligent and sympathetic even when audiences disagreed with his decisions. Emma Stone's performance earned recognition for bringing emotional balance to the increasingly tense narrative. While some critics felt the movie's ambitious themes occasionally became overwhelming, many agreed that few filmmakers today are willing to take creative risks on this scale. Whether audiences loved every aspect of the film or not, almost everyone agreed that it encouraged discussion rather than passive entertainment. General audiences responded in similarly divided but passionate ways. Some viewers considered Eddington one of Ari Aster's boldest achievements because it challenged expectations and refused to provide simple answers. Others found its slow pacing and uncomfortable subject matter emotionally demanding. Interestingly, this division may have actually helped the film remain relevant. Movies that everyone quickly forgets rarely generate lasting conversations, but films that inspire debate often continue attracting new viewers. Social media quickly filled with analyses, ending explanations, symbolism breakdowns, and discussions about hidden meanings. Fans examined individual scenes frame by frame, searching for visual clues and thematic connections. Many argued that Eddington would become even more appreciated over time because its complex storytelling rewards repeat viewings. One interesting fact is that Ari Aster reportedly wanted audiences to feel uncertain throughout the movie. Rather than telling viewers exactly who was right or wrong, he intentionally leaves room for personal interpretation. Different viewers may sympathize with different characters depending on their own experiences and perspectives. This approach transforms the audience into active participants instead of passive observers. Rather than simply watching events unfold, viewers constantly evaluate motivations, question decisions, and reconsider earlier assumptions as new information appears. This intellectual engagement is one reason many people left theaters continuing to discuss the film long afterward. Another fascinating detail involves the movie's title. Although Eddington refers to the fictional town where the story takes place, the name gradually becomes symbolic. By the end of the film, the town represents much more than a physical location. It becomes a metaphor for communities everywhere struggling with fear, division, and the challenge of maintaining trust during uncertain times. The movie suggests that Eddington could exist almost anywhere because the emotions explored in the story are universal. People everywhere have experienced moments when uncertainty created conflict, when rumors spread faster than facts, and when neighbors struggled to understand one another. This universal quality gives the film lasting in emotional relevance beyond its specific historical setting. Perhaps the greatest strength of Eddington is that it never treats its audience as incapable of independent thought. Ari Aster refuses to simplify difficult questions or provide easy solutions. Instead, he presents flawed individuals attempting to navigate extraordinary circumstances, allowing viewers to reach their own conclusions. This confidence in the audience reflects mature filmmaking. Rather than chasing constant excitement, the movie values conversation, reflection, and emotional honesty. Long after the credits roll, viewers continue thinking about the choices each character made and wondering whether different decisions could have changed the outcome. That lingering emotional impact is often the mark of truly memorable cinema. As the story continues, one of the most impressive things about Eddington is how it constantly changes the audience's expectations. At first, viewers may think they are watching a political drama. Then the film slowly begins to feel like a psychological thriller. A few scenes later, it suddenly becomes a dark comedy, making people laugh at the absurdity of human behavior before immediately pulling them back into moments of tension and emotional discomfort. This constant shift in tone could have easily become confusing, but Ari Aster carefully controls the pacing so that every genre serves the larger story. Instead of feeling like several different movies mixed together, Eddington becomes a portrait of modern America during one of the most chaotic periods in recent history. The film reminds us that real life rarely fits into a single genre. Sometimes life is tragic, sometimes it is funny, sometimes frightening, and sometimes completely unpredictable. That mixture of emotions is exactly what gives the movie its realism. One of the film's greatest strengths is its ability to create tension without depending on traditional action sequences. There are no endless car chases or explosions every few minutes. Instead, the suspense comes from conversations, misunderstandings, rumors, and growing distrust. Every meeting between Sheriff Joe Cross and Mayor Ted Garcia feels like another step towards something much larger. Neither character begins the story wanting complete destruction, but both become trapped by pride, public pressure, and the expectations of the people around them. As their disagreement grows, They find it increasingly difficult to admit mistakes or compromise. This creates a powerful emotional conflict because viewers can understand the reasoning behind both men even when they disagree with their decisions. Rather than presenting a simple battle between good and evil, the movie explores how ordinary people can unintentionally make situations worse simply because they refuse to back down. Joaquin Phoenix once again proves why he is considered one of the finest actors of his generation. His performance is built almost entirely on emotional honesty. Sheriff Joe Cross is not portrayed as a fearless action hero. He becomes frustrated, uncertain, emotionally exhausted, and sometimes overwhelmed by the responsibilities placed upon him. Phoenix allows these vulnerabilities to appear naturally without turning the character into someone weak. Instead, his imperfections make him feel human. Many of the film's most memorable moments involve nothing more than his facial expressions as he silently processes difficult situations. Even without speaking, viewers understand the emotional weight his character is carrying. This kind of performance requires extraordinary control because every small movement contributes to the storytelling. Pedro Pascal matches that intensity with an equally layered performance. Mayor Ted Garcia is not simply an ambitious politician interested only in power. The screenplay allows audiences to see his genuine concern for public safety while also exposing the personal ambition that influences many of his decisions. Pascal avoids making the character arrogant or overly sympathetic. Instead, he creates someone who sincerely believes he is acting responsibly, even when his choices create new problems. This complexity keeps the audience emotionally engaged because the conflict never becomes predictable. Throughout the story, viewers may find themselves changing sides several times as new information emerges and different perspectives become clearer. Emma Stone delivers one of the film's quietest yet most emotionally affecting performances. Rather than dominating scenes with dramatic speeches, she represents the emotional cost of the town's growing division. Her character experiences the consequences of decisions made by others, reminding viewers that political and social conflicts always affect ordinary families. Austin Butler also leaves a strong impression despite having less screen time than the leading actors. His mysterious presence introduces uncertainty whenever he appears, and the audience is never completely sure what his true intentions might be. This unpredictability adds another layer of suspense to the already complex narrative. The supporting cast deserves tremendous credit because they transform Eddington into a believable community rather than simply serving as background characters. Every resident appears to have a personal history, individual opinions, and emotional struggles. Even characters with limited screen time contribute to the larger themes of the story. Some represent people desperately searching for reliable information, while others symbolize how quickly fear can spread through communities. Together, these performances create the feeling that Eddington is a real town experiencing extraordinary circumstances rather than a fictional location built only for dramatic effect. Another remarkable achievement lies in the screenplay's treatment of misinformation. Instead of presenting false information as something spread only by obviously dishonest people, the film shows how confusion itself becomes dangerous. Well meaning individuals repeat rumors because they believe they are helping others. Fear encourages people to accept simple explanations instead of complicated truths. As uncertainty grows, facts become increasingly difficult to separate from speculation. This realistic portrayal reflects one of the defining challenges of modern society. The movie never claims that one group alone is responsible for misinformation. Instead, it suggests that emotional reactions often spread much faster than careful investigation. This balanced approach encourages viewers to think critically rather than simply accepting easy conclusions. Visually, Eddington continues to impress through careful composition and restrained filmmaking. Darius Conji's cinematography often frames characters as physically separated from one another even when they occupy the same room. Doorways, windows, fences, and other objects frequently divide the frame, subtly reinforcing the emotional distance growing between individuals. Wide landscape shots remind audiences of the vast desert surrounding the town, creating an ironic contrast between open spaces and increasingly narrow perspectives among the residents. As the story progresses, these visual metaphors become more noticeable without ever feeling forced or artificial. Color also plays an important symbolic role throughout the movie. Early scenes contain warmer tones that suggest normal community life despite underlying tensions. As conflicts become more serious, the visual palette gradually shifts toward cooler colors and harsher lighting. This transformation happens slowly enough that many viewers may not consciously notice it during their first viewing. However, the emotional impact is undeniable. By the final act, the town feels completely different from the peaceful place introduced at the beginning, even though many locations remain physically unchanged. The transformation exists primarily within the emotional atmosphere rather than the environment itself. Editing contributes significantly to this emotional progression. Instead of using rapid cuts to create excitement, the film often allows scenes to continue longer than audiences might expect. These extended moments create a feeling of realism because conversations unfold naturally rather than being compressed for dramatic convenience. At times, viewers may feel slightly uncomfortable waiting for characters to respond. That discomfort is intentional. Ari Aster wants the audience to experience uncertainty alongside the characters. Every silence becomes meaningful, every hesitation raises new questions, and every delayed response increases emotional tension. The film's soundtrack continues supporting this atmosphere through remarkable restraint. Bobby Kurlick and Daniel Pemberton understand that silence can sometimes communicate more effectively than music. Many emotionally intense scenes contain only environmental sounds such as distant wind, footsteps, passing vehicles, or quiet breathing. When musical themes finally emerge, they never overwhelm the performances. Instead, they quietly reflect emotional states, enhancing the audience's connection to the characters without demanding attention for themselves. This subtle approach makes the score one of the film's hidden strengths. Following its theatrical release, discussions about Eddington expanded far beyond traditional movie reviews. Film critics analyzed its themes, political commentators debated its social observations, and audiences shared countless personal interpretations online. Some viewers praised the movie as one of the boldest American films in recent years because it explored difficult topics without offering simplistic answers. Others believed its refusal to choose clear heroes and villains made it frustrating. Yet, even those who criticized certain aspects often acknowledged the film's ambition and originality. In an era when many movies follow familiar formulas, Eddington stood out because it challenged audiences instead of simply entertaining them. The film also generated numerous fan theories. Some viewers argued that certain scenes should be interpreted symbolically rather than literally. Others searched for hidden meanings in repeated visual motifs, background details, and seemingly ordinary conversations. Social media platforms became filled with detailed breakdowns, examining everything from camera placement to costume colors. This level of audience engagement demonstrates one of the movie's greatest achievements. Rather than disappearing from public conversation after opening weekend, Eddington encouraged viewers to revisit, debate, and reinterpret its story. Every new viewing seemed to reveal another subtle clue or thematic connection that had previously gone unnoticed. One especially interesting fact is that Ari Aster deliberately resisted making the film feel like a documentary about 2020. Although it is clearly inspired by real historical events, he consistently focuses on emotional truth rather than recreating specific incidents. This decision allows the movie to remain relevant beyond its historical setting. Years from now, audiences will likely connect with its themes of fear, division, communication, and trust, even if the immediate context changes. That timeless quality separates Eddington from many films that focus too narrowly on current events. Ultimately, Eddington succeeds because it respects its audience's intelligence. It trusts viewers to notice subtle details, question assumptions, and draw their own conclusions. Rather than explaining every theme through dialogue, the movie communicates through performance, atmosphere, visual storytelling, and emotional honesty. It is not a film designed to provide simple comfort or easy answers. Instead, it invites reflection, discussion, and careful observation. Whether audiences consider it a masterpiece or simply an ambitious experiment, few will deny that it leaves a lasting impression. That ability to remain in viewers' minds long after the credits roll is perhaps the greatest compliment any filmmaker can receive. One of the most fascinating aspects of Eddington is how differently people interpret the same events. Two viewers can watch exactly the same scene and come away with completely different opinions about who was right and who was wrong. That is a sign of intelligent filmmaking. Ari Aster never forces the audience to support one side. Instead, he presents every major conflict through multiple perspectives, allowing viewers to make their own decisions. Sheriff Joe Cross believes that protecting personal freedom is part of his responsibility, while Mayor Ted Garcia believes that leadership sometimes requires making unpopular decisions for the greater good. Neither man wakes up each morning intending to become the villain of the story. Their conflict grows because both are convinced they are acting in the best interest of the town. This realistic approach reflects how many real life disagreements begin. Not because people are evil, but because they sincerely believe their own perspective is correct. As the tension increases, pride replaces communication and compromise slowly disappears. By the time both men realize how serious the situation has become, repairing the damage feels almost impossible. This gradual emotional breakdown is one of the screenplay's greatest achievements because it feels painfully believable. The movie also explores the psychological effects of isolation. During the pandemic, millions of people experienced loneliness, uncertainty, and emotional exhaustion. Eddington captures these feelings without constantly talking about them. Instead of explaining emotions through long speeches, the film lets the audience observe changes in behavior. Characters become more suspicious, more impatient, and more emotionally distant from one another. Friends who once laughed together now hesitate before speaking openly. Families begin arguing over issues they had never considered before. Even ordinary conversations carry hidden tension because everyone fears saying the wrong thing. These emotional shifts happen gradually, making them feel authentic rather than exaggerated. Ari Aster understands that fear rarely transforms people overnight. Instead, it changes them little by little until one day they barely recognize themselves. Another remarkable strength of the film is its portrayal of leadership under pressure. Leadership often looks simple from a distance, but Eddington demonstrates how impossible many decisions become during moments of crisis. Every choice creates new problems. If leaders act quickly, they are criticized for moving too fast. If they wait, they are accused of doing nothing. Sheriff Joe Cross and Mayor Ted Garcia face constant public pressure from different groups demanding completely opposite solutions. No matter what decision they make, someone will feel disappointed or betrayed. This impossible situation gives both characters emotional depth because viewers can understand why they struggle, even when they disagree with the outcomes. Rather than celebrating authority or attacking it, the movie asks audiences to consider how difficult leadership becomes when every decision affects an entire community. Joaquin Phoenix deserves particular praise for the physical details he brings to Sheriff Joe Cross. Throughout the movie, his posture gradually changes as emotional pressure increases. Early in the story, he appears confident and comfortable performing his daily responsibilities. As events spiral out of control, subtle changes begin to appear. His shoulders become heavier, his movements slower, and his facial expressions reveal growing exhaustion. These physical choices communicate emotional decline without requiring explicit dialogue. It is a masterclass in understated acting. Phoenix has always been known for disappearing into his characters, and Eddington continues that tradition by presenting another deeply human performance filled with vulnerability and quiet intensity. Pedro Pascal provides the perfect counterbalance. His mayor Ted Garcia is calm, intelligent, and politically experienced, but beneath his confident exterior lies constant anxiety. Pascal portrays a man attempting to maintain public confidence while privately questioning whether every decision is making the situation worse. The audience can often sense the emotional burden hidden beneath his composed appearance. This internal conflict makes the character far more interesting than a traditional political antagonist. Instead of becoming someone audiences simply dislike, Ted Garcia remains understandable throughout the story. His flaws emerge naturally from difficult circumstances rather than personal cruelty. This complexity is one reason many viewers continue debating his character long after finishing the film. Emma Stone quietly delivers some of the movie's most emotionally honest moments. Her performance reminds viewers that large political and social conflicts eventually reach individual families. While community leaders argue over policies and responsibilities, ordinary people continue trying to protect relationships, maintain hope, and survive emotionally. Stone brings warmth and vulnerability to these quieter scenes, providing an important emotional balance to the increasingly tense atmosphere. Austin Butler also leaves a lasting impression by creating a character whose intentions remain difficult to predict. Every appearance raises new questions, adding another layer of uncertainty to an already unpredictable narrative. The visual storytelling deserves even closer examination because nearly every frame contains symbolic meaning. Darius Konji frequently places characters behind windows, fences, or reflections, visually suggesting that people struggle to see one another clearly despite living in the same community. Mirrors appear throughout the film, reinforcing themes of identity, self perception, and distorted reality. Roads stretching endlessly through the New Mexico desert symbolize both freedom and isolation. The town itself becomes a visual metaphor for modern society, small enough that everyone knows each other yet emotionally divided by invisible barriers. These symbolic choices never interrupt the story because they remain subtle enough to reward attentive viewers without distracting casual audiences. The editing also contributes significantly to the emotional rhythm. Instead of rushing from one dramatic event to another, Ari Aster allows consequences to unfold naturally. Characters spend time processing difficult experiences rather than immediately moving to the next plot point. This slower pacing may surprise viewers expecting a conventional thriller, but it creates much stronger emotional investment. Every decision carries visible consequences, and every conversation leaves emotional marks that continue influencing future events. By respecting realistic emotional timing, the film avoids feeling artificial or manipulative. Instead, audiences experience the gradual accumulation of pressure alongside the characters themselves. One interesting behind the scenes fact is that Ari Aster reportedly encouraged actors to explore scenes through extended rehearsals before filming, rather than focusing only on memorizing dialogue. Performers discuss their characters' personal histories, motivations, and emotional relationships. Many of these discussions never appear directly in the final movie, but they helped actors develop believable performances rooted in genuine emotional understanding. This preparation explains why even brief interactions between supporting characters feel surprisingly authentic. Every resident of Eddington appears to have lived in the town for years rather than simply arriving for the movie's events. The production design also deserves recognition for creating such a convincing small town atmosphere. Every building, street, and interior location feels naturally lived in. Local businesses display ordinary details that make the environment believable. Community bulletin boards, election signs, family photographs, office decorations, and household objects quietly tell stories about the people who live there. Rather than drawing attention to themselves, these details contribute to the feeling that Eddington existed long before the audience arrived and will continue existing after the credits end. This realism strengthens emotional immersion because viewers begin accepting the fictional town as a genuine place. Following its theatrical release, Eddington quickly became one of the year's most discussed films across social media and film communities. Review videos, podcasts, essays, and online discussions explored nearly every aspect of the movie. Fans debated hidden symbolism, analyzed dialogue, examined visual metaphors, and proposed alternative interpretations of key scenes. Some viewers described it as Ari Aster's most mature and ambitious work, while others considered it his most divisive. Yet almost everyone agreed that the movie encouraged thoughtful conversation rather than passive entertainment. In today's film industry, where many releases disappear from public attention within weeks, Eddington managed to remain relevant because audiences continued discovering new details with every viewing. Another fascinating aspect of audience reaction involved generational differences. Younger viewers often connected strongly with the film's portrayal of social media, online misinformation, and digital communication, while older audiences frequently focused more on themes of community leadership, personal responsibility, and changing social values. This ability to speak to different generations simultaneously demonstrates the screenplay's complexity. Each viewer may notice different emotional truths depending on personal experiences, making the movie feel surprisingly personal despite its broad social themes. Perhaps the greatest compliment that can be given to Eddington is that it refuses to underestimate its audience. It doesn't provide simple heroes, obvious villains, or convenient solutions. Instead, it asks difficult questions about trust, fear, leadership, communication, and human nature. The movie recognizes that real life is rarely divided into clear categories of right and wrong. People make decisions based on limited information, emotional pressure, personal beliefs, and imperfect understanding. By embracing this complexity, Ari Aster creates a film that remains thought provoking long after the final scene. Whether viewers agree with every creative decision or not, Eddington succeeds in starting conversations that continue well beyond the theater, and that lasting impact is one of the clearest signs of meaningful cinema. As the film moves toward its final act, one thing becomes increasingly clear. Eddington is not interested in giving the audience easy answers. Instead of following the traditional Hollywood formula where the hero defeats the villain and everything returns to normal, Ari Aster chooses a far more realistic direction. Real communities do not heal overnight, and emotional wounds cannot be erased by one dramatic speech or one heroic action. The damage caused by fear, misunderstanding, and division often lasts much longer than the events that created it. This idea becomes one of the movie's most powerful messages. Every major character must eventually face the consequences of earlier decisions. Some discover that good intentions are not always enough to prevent tragedy. Others realize that remaining silent during important moments can be just as damaging as making the wrong decision. These emotional consequences give the story lasting weight because they remind viewers that every choice matters, even when the results are not immediately visible. One of Ari Aster's greatest talents has always been his ability to create emotional discomfort through ordinary situations. In Hereditary, he transformed family grief into psychological horror. In Midsommar, he used bright daylight to create one of the most disturbing horror experiences of modern cinema. In Bo is Afraid, he explored anxiety through surreal storytelling. With Eddington, he takes a completely different approach. This time, the horror comes from reality itself. The fear is not supernatural. It comes from watching neighbors lose trust in each other, from seeing communities become divided by misinformation, and from witnessing ordinary people slowly become trapped by anger and suspicion. There are moments when the audience may even forget they are watching fiction because the emotions feel so familiar. That realism is what makes the movie so unsettling. Throughout the film, Ari Aster avoids judging his characters too quickly. Every major person in the story makes mistakes, but every one of them also experiences moments of genuine humanity. Sheriff Joe Cross may become stubborn, but viewers understand the emotional pressure he carries. Mayor Ted Garcia may appear politically calculating, but his concern for the town never feels completely fake. Even supporting characters who spread rumors or contribute to the growing conflict are not presented as cartoon villains. Instead, the screenplay explores why people sometimes choose comforting lies instead of difficult truths. This balanced approach encourages audiences to think critically rather than simply deciding who deserves blame. Another reason the film feels so realistic is the way it portrays communication breaking down. Early in the story, disagreements remain relatively small. People argue, but they still attempt to understand one another. As tensions grow, conversations become shorter, louder, and more emotional. Eventually, many characters stop listening entirely. They begin responding before others have finished speaking. They assume intentions without asking questions. They believe rumors before checking facts. These communication failures slowly transform minor disagreements into major conflicts. The screenplay quietly suggests that the real tragedy isn't simply the events themselves, but the loss of meaningful conversation between people who once trusted each other. From a filmmaking perspective, the sound design deserves tremendous recognition. While many viewers immediately notice the performances or cinematography, the sound team contributes enormously to the emotional atmosphere. Silence is used with remarkable confidence. Instead of filling every moment with background music or constant environmental noise, the film often allows scenes to breathe naturally. During emotionally difficult conversations, audiences hear subtle sounds like footsteps, distant wind, chairs moving across floors, breathing, or quiet traffic outside. These realistic details create intimacy, making viewers feel as though they are standing inside the room alongside the characters. When music finally enters during key emotional moments, its impact becomes much stronger because it has been used so sparingly. The collaboration between composers Bobby Colick and Daniel Pemberton creates one of the year's most understated film scores. Rather than writing melodies that immediately demand attention, they focus on emotional texture. Soft electronic tones blend with orchestral instruments to create music that often feels more like an emotional atmosphere than a traditional soundtrack. Viewers may not consciously remember every musical theme after leaving the theater, but they will almost certainly remember how the music made them feel. That emotional subtlety perfectly matches Ari Aster's directing style, which consistently values psychological immersion over obvious dramatic effects. The editing rhythm also plays a major role in maintaining suspense. Ari Aster resists the temptation to speed through important scenes. Instead, editors allow conversations to unfold naturally, giving actors enough time to express emotional complexity. This slower pace may surprise viewers expecting constant excitement, but it serves an important purpose. By allowing emotional moments to fully develop, the audience becomes more invested in every relationship. When conflicts eventually reach their breaking point, they feel earned rather than manufactured. Every major event appears to grow naturally from previous choices instead of existing simply to shock the audience. One particularly interesting fact about Eddington is how much discussion it generated regarding its symbolism. Film enthusiasts quickly noticed recurring visual patterns throughout the movie. Mirrors frequently appear during moments of personal uncertainty, suggesting that characters struggle to understand both themselves and each other. Fierce's windows often separate people physically while allowing them to observe one another from a distance, symbolizing the growing emotional barriers within the community. Wide desert landscapes represent both freedom and isolation at the same time. These symbolic elements are never explained directly, allowing audiences to interpret them according to their own perspectives. This openness has encouraged countless online discussions, with viewers sharing different interpretations long after watching the film. Another fascinating topic among fans has been Ari Aster's decision to avoid presenting a perfectly satisfying conclusion. Many mainstream films answer every question before the credits roll. Eddington intentionally leaves certain emotional and thematic questions open for interpretation. This approach has divided audiences. Some viewers appreciate the realism because life rarely provides perfect closure. Others prefer more definitive endings. Regardless of personal preference, the film succeeds in encouraging conversation. People continue debating character motivations, hidden meanings, and possible interpretation because the movie respects their intelligence enough not to explain everything. The performances remain one of the strongest reasons why these discussions continue. Joaquin Phoenix once again demonstrates extraordinary emotional control. His portrayal of Sheriff Joe Cross avoids dramatic exaggeration, relying instead on subtle expressions and believable vulnerability. Pedro Pascal provides an equally nuanced performance, ensuring that Mayor Ted Garcia never becomes a one dimensional political figure. Emma Stone brings warmth and emotional grounding to the story, reminding audiences that behind every public conflict are ordinary people trying to protect those they love. Austin Butler and the supporting cast complete the ensemble with performances that feel authentic rather than theatrical. Together, they create one of the most convincing communities seen in recent cinema. From a critical perspective, Eddington represents another bold chapter in Ari Aster's career. Some critics described it as his most ambitious project because it attempts to combine political satire, psychological drama, social commentary, Western imagery, and emotional character study into a single narrative. Such ambition naturally creates mixed reactions. Not every viewer will connect with every creative decision. However, even many critics who expressed reservations praised the film's originality, technical craftsmanship, and willingness to explore uncomfortable subjects without reducing them to simple slogans. In an era when many films prioritize familiar formulas, Eddington stands out because it consistently takes creative risks. Looking at the film from a broader perspective, it may eventually be remembered as one of the defining cinematic reflections on the emotional atmosphere of the early 2020s. Rather than documenting specific historical events, it captures something more universal. The feeling of uncertainty experienced by millions of people during a period when trust became fragile and communities struggled to remain united. Because the film focuses on emotional truth rather than political argument, its themes are likely to remain relevant for many years. Future audiences may watch Eddington not simply as a story about one fictional town but as a portrait of how fear and misunderstanding can influence any society. Perhaps the greatest lesson offered by the movie is that communication remains humanity's most valuable tool. The tragedy unfolding in Eddington does not begin with violence, it begins with misunderstanding. People stop listening, they assume instead of asking, they judge instead of learning. These small failures gradually become much larger problems until repairing relationships becomes incredibly difficult. Through this progression, R.I. Aster quietly reminds viewers that protecting trust requires constant effort. Communities survive not because everyone agrees, but because people continue talking even when disagreements exist. By the time the credits roll, audiences are left with far more than memories of individual scenes or performances. They leave with questions about leadership, responsibility, truth, fear, media influence, and human nature itself. Very few films manage to entertain while also encouraging genuine self reflection. Eddington accomplishes both. It challenges viewers emotionally, intellectually, and morally without pretending to possess all the answers. That confidence in the audience may ultimately become its greatest achievement. Rather than telling people what to think, it invites them to think more deeply. and that is one of the highest compliments any film can earn. Eddington is a 2025 American film that mixes satire with the feel of a modern western and the tension of a thriller. It was written and directed by Ari Aster, a filmmaker known for unsettling, boundary pushing work, and it brought together a cast of well known actors including Joaquin Phoenix, Pedro Pascal, Luke Grimes, Deirdre O'Connell, Michael Ward, Austin Butler, and Emma Stone. The story is set in the year 2020, right in the middle of the COVID 19 pandemic and the wave of George Floyd protests that swept across the United States that year. Instead of telling a straightforward pandemic drama, the film uses that chaotic moment in American life to examine how political division, conspiracy thinking, and social unrest tore apart a small fictional town called Eddington, New Mexico. At the center of the story is a bitter and increasingly personal battle for the office of mayor, fought between the town's sheriff, Joe Cross, played by Joaquin Phoenix, and the sitting mayor, Ted Garcia, played by Pedro Pascal. The film had its first public screening at the Cannes Film Festival in France on May 16, 2025, where it was shown as part of the festival's main competition lineup. It was later released more widely in movie theaters in the United States by the studio A24 on July 18, 2025. A24 has built a reputation for backing distinctive, often provocative films, and Eddington fit that mold. Critics generally responded to the film in a favorable way, though it did not perform strongly at the box office once it opened commercially. The plot begins in late May of 2020, during the early and especially frightening period of the COVID 19 pandemic. Ted Garcia, the mayor of Eddington, follows guidance handed down from the state governor and puts a lockdown in place in the town, along with rules requiring residents to wear masks in public. Joe Cross, the local sheriff, is deeply unhappy with these restrictions. He sees them as government overreach and argues that they trample on people's freedom to make their own choices about their health and their daily lives. This disagreement between the sheriff and the mayor becomes the spark that ignites everything that follows. Joe's home life is complicated. He lives with his wife, Louise, who is portrayed as emotionally fragile and withdrawn, and with Louise's mother, Dawn, a woman deeply invested in conspiracy theories. This household, filled with suspicion and old unresolved pain, becomes just as important to the story as the political battle unfolding in the town. After a series of tense run ins with Mayor Garcia, who is campaigning for re election on a platform that is friendly to technology companies and includes plans to allow a large data center to be built in the area, Joe makes the decision to run against him for mayor. This decision does not sit well with Louise, who prefers to stay out of public life and is uncomfortable with the exposure that comes with her husband's campaign. Despite her reluctance, Joe presses forward, pulling two of his sheriff's deputies, Guy and Michael, into the campaign to help him as aide. Meanwhile, tension builds inside Joe's own home. Louise and her mother Dawn invite a man named Vernon Jefferson Peake to dinner, a charismatic and radical cult leader with extreme beliefs. During the dinner conversation, the discussion turns toward Vernon's conspiracy theories involving pedophilia and child trafficking, dark and disturbing topics that reflect some of the real conspiracy movements that gained traction online during that period in American history. In the midst of this conversation, Louise makes a troubling and vague suggestion that her own father may have abused her when she was younger. Joe, hearing this, does not believe Vernon's own claims about his past, which Vernon says are based on memories he says he has recovered, a detail that casts doubt on how reliable this account really is. While all of this unfolds inside the Cross household, a separate storyline follows Ted Garcia's teenage son Eric. Eric becomes swept up in the local Black Lives Matter protests happening in Eddington, joining alongside his close friend Brian and a socially conscious young woman named Sarah, who is passionate about activism. Sarah tries without success to convince Michael, one of Joe's sheriff's deputies, to join the cause and stand with the protesters rather than the police. As the mayoral race grows more desperate, Joe crosses a serious line. During a public campaign event, he makes an explosive accusation claiming that Mayor Ted Garcia sexually assaulted his wife Louise. This claim upends the town and puts enormous pressure on Louise, who ultimately denies the accusation publicly in an online video before leaving Eddington altogether, departing town together with Vernon, the cult leader who had increasingly drawn her in. The story then takes a much darker and more violent turn. The day after Louise's departure, Joe shows up at Ted's home under the pretense of investigating a noise complaint, arriving in the middle of a fundraising event Ted is hosting. The confrontation between the two men escalates, and Ted slaps Joe in front of the fundraiser's guests, a humiliating moment that seems to push Joe over an edge. That same evening, Joe's actions spiral into outright violence. He shoots and kills a homeless man wandering nearby and dumps the body in a river close to town. Then, in an even more shocking act, he murders Ted and Ted's son Eric inside their own home using a rifle fitted with a scope, and afterwards stages the crime scene to make it appear as though the killings were carried out by Antifa, the loosely organized anti-fascist movement that had become a major point of political controversy during that era. At the same time this is happening, a private jet carrying a group of heavily armed and mysterious terrorists is making its way toward Eddington, setting up a second, almost surreal layer of danger that will soon collide with the fallout from Joe's crimes. A local police officer named Butterfly Jimenez, who is a member of the Pueblo tribal community, becomes involved in investigating the killings, largely because Joe had fired his rifle on land belonging to the Pueblo people, which brings the case under her jurisdiction as well. As the investigation moves forward, Joe attempts to protect himself by framing his own deputy, Michael, for the murders, arresting and jailing him in an effort to redirect suspicion away from himself. However, Officer Jimenez begins uncovering evidence and connections that point back toward the sheriff himself. The film then escalates into full blown chaos as the armed terrorists finally reach Eddington. They storm the town, breaking Michael out of his holding cell inside the sheriff's office and setting a string of fires as they make their escape, throwing the entire town into panic and disorder. Joe and his deputy Guy head out into the desert outside of town where they find the injured and terrified Michael, who desperately tries to warn them to stay back and not come any closer. His warning comes too late. An explosive device detonates as the officers approach, instantly killing Guy and leaving Michael with severe, life-altering injuries. Joe manages to make his way back into Eddington, but he quickly finds himself the target of snipers positioned around the town. He evades them first out in the desert and then again once he reaches his own home, narrowly escaping death multiple times. In a desperate bid to arm himself more heavily, he breaks into a local gun store. Once inside, in a chaotic and reckless burst of gunfire, he fires his weapons wildly. In the confusion, he accidentally shoots off the leg of Officer Butterfly Jimenez, the very officer who had been closing in on the truth about his crimes. Moments later, before she can be helped, a sniper kills her. Joe himself does not escape unscathed. He is eventually cornered by one of the terrorists and stabbed in the head, an attack that leaves him with catastrophic and permanent brain damage. He survives only because Brian, Eric's teenage friend from earlier in the film, shoots and kills the attacker, saving Joe's life while filming the entire dramatic rescue on his phone. The film then jumps forward 1 year. In this final stretch of the story, Brian has transformed his viral filmed rescue of Joe Doe into a springboard for a new career, becoming a prominent and recognizable conservative internet influencer, a sharp commentary on how ordinary or violent moments can be repackaged into online fame and political identity. Meanwhile, Joe himself has somehow been elected mayor of Eddington, despite the fact that the brain damage and paralysis he suffered during the attack have left him unable to function independently. Luis's mother Dawn now serves as his full-time caregiver and effectively speaks on his behalf during public appearances, since Joe himself can no longer communicate in the way he once could. They fear his recklessness would, in one of the film's final scenes after returning from the grand opening ceremony for the newly completed data center, the very project that had once been at the center of the political fight between Joe and Ted. Joe and Dawn sit together watching news coverage of Vernon and a now visibly pregnant Louise appearing at a public rally, suggesting that Louise has remained under Vernon's influence and that their relationship has continued in Joe's absence. Michael, who also survived his injuries from the desert explosion, has been promoted to the position of under sheriff and is shown quietly practicing target shooting on the edge of town, a quiet, unsettling final image. The film closes with Dawn and one of Joe's caregivers moving him into bed, after which the two women climb into the same bed alongside him. A strange and deliberately uncomfortable final image that leaves the viewer with more questions than answers about what has truly become of this family and this town. The cast of Eddington was built around several performers who are widely recognized. Joaquin Phoenix plays Joe Cross, the sheriff of the fictional Sevilla County and later a mayoral candidate whose actions drive much of the film's darkest turns. Pedro Pascal plays Ted Garcia, the town's incumbent mayor running for re-election on a platform tied to technology and development. Emma Stone takes on the role of Louise Cross, Joe's emotionally distant wife whose personal history and choices become central to the unraveling of the story. Austin Butler plays Vernon Jefferson Peake, the radical cult leader whose presence pulls Louise further away from her marriage. Luke Grimes plays Guy Tooley, one of the sheriff's deputies who ultimately loses his life during the desert explosion. Deirdre O'Connell plays Dawn, Louise's conspiracy-minded mother who ends up as Joe's caretaker by the film's end. Michael Ward plays Michael Cook, another of the sheriff's deputies who is framed for murder, badly injured, and later promoted to undersheriff. The supporting cast includes Amelie Hoffel as Sarah Allen, a young social justice influencer involved in the local protest movement, and Clifton Collins Jr. as Lodge, a mentally ill, homeless man who becomes one of Joe's early victims. William Bello plays Officer Butterfly Jimenez, the sharp and persistent Pueblo policewoman who investigates the murders and ultimately dies during the chaos near the film's end. Matt Gomez Hideka plays Eric Garcia, the mayor's son, and Cameron Mann plays Brian, Eric's close friend who eventually becomes a conservative media figure, saving Joe's life. Other performers filling out the cast include Rachel De La Torre as a local restaurant owner named Paula, Umadeo Arzola as a vocal protester named Laird, and several others playing smaller roles as protesters, terrorists, and townspeople. Interestingly, director Ari Aster himself appears briefly in the film in an uncredited role as a radio journalist. The origins of Eddington trace back many years before the film was actually made. Ari Aster had originally written the script as a contemporary western, and at one point he had considered making it his very first film as a director. Instead, he spent roughly 5 years trying to get the project off the ground before ultimately deciding to make his earlier acclaimed horror films Hereditary and Midsommar before returning to this idea. While he was promoting his third feature film, the surreal comedy drama Beau is Afraid, Astor mentioned publicly that his next project would likely be a western and that he had updated the script so that it would now be set during the COVID-19 pandemic, tying it directly into the very real anxieties and divisions that defined that period. Casting on the project began to take shape gradually. Emma Stone and actor Christopher Abbott were originally attached to star in the film as early as January 2023. Astor also intended to work once again with Joaquin Phoenix, having previously collaborated with him, and by August of that year, the two were seen scouting filming locations together in New Mexico. By March of 2024, the cast had solidified further, with Phoenix, Stone, Austin Butler, Pedro Pascal, Luke Grimes, Deirdre O'Connell, Michael Ward, and Clifton Collins Jr. all confirmed as part of the film, with Butler eventually stepping into the role originally intended for Christopher Abbott. The film was produced through Square Peg and A24, with additional financing coming from Access Entertainment and IP or VC. Principal photography for Eddington took place between March and May of 2024, with filming occurring in Albuquerque and in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, two locations that gave the film its authentic small town, southwestern American atmosphere. One small but interesting production detail involves a water tower featuring a painted mural that appears early in the film. Although the story is set in the fictional town of Eddington, that particular water tower is actually the real Las Cruces water tank, borrowed as a filming location to help build the world of the story. The film's musical score was created by two composers working together. In April of 2025, it was announced that Bobby Kurlick, also known by his stage name The Haxan Cloak, would be composing the score. Kurlick had worked with Astor before, having contributed to both Midsommar and Beau is Afraid, making him a familiar creative partner for this kind of unsettling, tonally complex material. About a month later, in early May of 2025, it was announced that composer Daniel Pemberton would also be joining the project, working alongside Kurlick to co-compose the film's music. Following its Cannes premiere, Eddington continued its festival run throughout the year. It played at the Sydney Film Festival in Australia on June 12, 2025, and later screened at the Revelation Perth International Film Festival on July 5, 2025. The film also served as the opening selection for the 29th edition of the Fantasia International Film Festival on July 16, 2025, shortly before its wide theatrical release. It later appeared in the Best of 2025 selection at the 20th Rome Film Festival in October 2025 and was showcased in the Gala selection section of the 38th Tokyo International Film Festival on October 30, 2025. They fear his recklessness would, reflecting the kind of sustained international attention the film received throughout the year following its debut. When Eddington finally opened in theaters across the United States and Canada, it released the same weekend as two other films, the family-friendly Smurfs movie and the horror sequel I Know What You Did Last Summer. Industry analysts had projected that Eddington would earn somewhere between $3 and $5 million during its opening weekend from a release spread across roughly 2,111 theaters. In the end, the film opened with $3 million, landing in sixth place at the domestic box office that weekend. Its performance dropped considerably in its second weekend, earning only $1.6 million and falling to eighth place. Given that the film had a reported budget of $25 million, this box office performance was considered disappointing, and by the time later figures were reported, the film's worldwide gross stood at approximately $13.7 million. Critical reception, while not universally positive, leaned favorably overall. On the review aggregation website Rotten Tomatoes, 69% of 284 critics gave the film a positive review. The site's general critical consensus described the film as one carrying a strong cast and fearless direction from Ari Aster, paired with an unusual and off-kilter story, though it noted that the film's shifting tone would likely leave some viewers unsatisfied. On Metacritic, another aggregator that calculates a weighted average score from critic reviews, the film received a score of 65 out of 100 based on 50 reviews, which the site categorizes as generally favorable. Interestingly, general audience response as measured through CinemaScore polling of opening weekend moviegoers was notably cooler, with audiences giving the film an average grade of C+ on a scale that runs from A+ down to F, suggesting a real gap between how critics and general audiences responded to the film's unusual tone and unsettling subject matter. Individual critics offered a wide range of perspectives. Brian Tallarico, writing for RogerEbert.com, gave the film 2.5 stars out of 4, describing it as a movie that is not simply about the divisiveness of the year 2020, but one that is deliberately designed to be divisive itself when viewed in 2025, adding that even audience members who dislike the film would likely agree that it succeeded in stirring strong reactions. David Ehrlich of IndieWire took a much more enthusiastic stance, awarding the film an A grade and praising it for vividly and uncomfortably capturing how much people's digital lives have stripped away their ability to trust their own sense of truth and reality. Justin Chang of The New Yorker was considerably more critical, describing the film as a slog despite its clear ambitions and criticizing what he saw as underdeveloped satire and characters that the director himself seemed only mildly interested in judging, a boredom Chang felt bled through into the viewing experience. Owen Gleiberman of Variety praised the film's boldness and its blending of different genres, calling it a brazenly provocative Western thriller and singling out Joaquin Phoenix's performance as one of his most complex and layered since his acclaimed role in Joker. Peter Howell of the Toronto Star offered a memorably mixed assessment, describing the film as a satire without laughs, a fright movie without jump scares, a western without a clear villain, and a piece of social commentary lacking a clear moral compass. Kevin Maher of The Times wrote that the film seemed uncertain of what it ultimately wanted to say about its central subject matter, arguing that while Astor spent a great deal of attention on the small details and textures of pandemic era life, the actual drama and character development felt undernourished by comparison. Despite this mixed critical conversation, the film found at least one particularly enthusiastic high profile supporter. Filmmaker John Waters, known for his own provocative and boundary pushing films, selected Eddington as the best movie of the entire year 2025, a notable endorsement from a respected figure within independent and unconventional cinema. The film also received recognition on the awards circuit, most notably being nominated for the Palme d'Or, the top prize awarded at the Cannes Film Festival, with Ari Aster recognized as the nominee for the award following the film's premiere there on May 24th, 2025. Beyond the plot and production details, several critics and Astor himself have spoken about the deeper meaning behind Eddington. Many critics observed that the film uses the framework of the Western genre as a lens for examining contemporary American political division, the spread of conspiracy theories, and the particular kind of paranoia that took hold during the pandemic years. David Ehrlich of IndieWire specifically described the film as a bleak and brilliant portrait of post COVID America. Astor himself offered his own explanation of the film's central idea, stating plainly that if he had to summarize it simply, Eddington is really a film about a data center being built. He expanded on this thought in more detail, explaining that from his perspective, the true common enemy running through the film is distraction itself. He described a collapsing system in which political conflicts captivate and mesmerize people, while large technology companies and concentrated capital quietly take control of everything around them. He suggested that the pandemic accelerated a situation in which ordinary people had already lost real power and access to changing the world around them, and that control over data and information has become the true privilege of power in modern society, a privilege that functions even more effectively when people's suspicion and anger get redirected toward their neighbors instead of toward those actually holding power. Astor argued that the old democratic ideal, the notion that democracy itself would serve as a counterbalance against power running unchecked, has essentially disappeared, and that the pandemic served as the final blow, severing that connection. He described the characters within in Eddington as people driving themselves mad, trying to grapple with this reality of overwhelming, distant power, whether or not they are even consciously aware that this is what they are struggling against. Oster has also confirmed that some form of follow up to Eddington is currently in development, though he has been careful to clarify that it should not be understood as a direct sequel. Instead, he has described it as a separate story that will nonetheless feature some returning characters from Eddington, suggesting that the world and people introduced in this film may continue to be explored in future work. As conversations about Eddington continued after its release, many film critics began comparing it to some of the most memorable modern dramas that explored American society through fictional stories. However, Ari Aster's approach remained completely unique. Instead of focusing on one central event, he captures an entire emotional atmosphere. The film doesn't simply ask what happened inside the town of Eddington, it asks why people react the way they do when fear, uncertainty, and constant information begin to overwhelm them. In today's world, news spreads within seconds. Opinions become facts before anyone checks them, and emotions often travel much faster than truth. Eddington transformed these modern realities into compelling cinematic storytelling. Rather than presenting technology as either completely good or completely bad, the movie explores how human behavior determines whether communication becomes helpful or destructive. This balanced perspective allows the story to feel surprisingly timeless despite being rooted in the events of 2020. One of the most interesting creative decisions is the film's refusal to rush emotional moments. Modern audiences have become accustomed to rapid editing, constant action, and quick plot developments. Ari Aster deliberately moves in the opposite direction. He believes tension grows stronger when viewers are given enough time to absorb each situation. Instead of immediately cutting away after an important conversation, the camera often remains with characters as they quietly process what has just happened. These silent moments become emotionally powerful because they remind audiences that real people need time to think, regret, and reflect. Some viewers initially described the pacing as slow, but many later admitted that this deliberate rhythm became one of the film's greatest strengths. It allows emotions to settle naturally. Instead of forcing dramatic reactions every few minutes, Joaquin Phoenix's performance becomes even more impressive when viewed from this perspective. His acting style perfectly matches Ari Aster's patient storytelling. Rather than relying on dramatic monologues, Phoenix communicates through subtle emotional changes that unfold gradually across the entire film. Sheriff Joe Cross begins as someone who believes experience and common sense can solve almost any problem. As circumstances become increasingly complicated, viewers slowly witness his confidence transforming into frustration, confusion, and emotional fatigue. This transformation never feels sudden because Phoenix builds it step by step. Every difficult conversation leaves another emotional mark, and by the end of the story, the audience fully understands how deeply the events have affected him. Pedro Pascal's mayor Ted Garcia experiences a similarly compelling emotional journey. Publicly, he must continue projecting confidence because leaders are expected to appear certain even during uncertain times. Privately, however, the audience witnesses moments of hesitation and self doubt. Pascal portrays this contradiction with remarkable restraint. His character genuinely wants to lead responsibly, yet every decision creates new criticism from different sides. The screenplay wisely avoids presenting leadership as either heroic or villainous. Instead, it shows how complicated decision making becomes when communities are divided and every choice satisfies one group while disappointing another. This complexity gives Ted Garcia emotional credibility and prevents him from becoming a stereotypical political character. Another aspect that deserves recognition is the screenplay's treatment of ordinary citizens. Many political dramas focus almost exclusively on leaders, leaving everyday people in the background. Eddington takes a different approach. The residents of the town constantly influence events through their own decisions, conversations, fears, and misunderstandings. Shop owners, families, workers, young adults, elderly residents, and local officials all contribute to the emotional landscape of the story. Every individual responds differently to uncertainty. Some seek reliable information, others become overwhelmed by rumors, while still others simply try to protect their families from growing conflict. This diversity of reactions reflects real communities where no single opinion represents everyone. By giving attention to these smaller stories, Ari Aster reminds viewers that history is shaped not only by leaders but also by the countless choices made by ordinary people every day. The film's visual language continues reinforcing these themes throughout its running time. Cinematographer Darius Konji consistently uses architecture to emphasize emotional separation. Characters are frequently positioned in different rooms connected only by open doorways, visually suggesting that communication remains possible even when understanding becomes difficult. Long hallways create a feeling of emotional distance, while windows allow characters to observe one another without truly connecting. These visual decisions never distract from the narrative because they emerge naturally from realistic locations. Yet they quietly reinforce the screenplay's central message that physical closeness does not always guarantee emotional understanding. Lighting also evolves alongside the emotional story. Early scenes often appear warm and inviting despite underlying tensions. As relationships become more strained, the lighting grows increasingly neutral and sometimes even cold. Interestingly, Ari Aster avoids relying on darkness to create suspense. Many emotionally intense scenes occur in broad daylight, reminding audiences that fear and conflict do not require nighttime settings. This creative decision strengthens realism because life's most difficult moments often happen during completely ordinary afternoons rather than dramatic cinematic nights. By refusing to romanticize conflict, the film maintains its grounded emotional atmosphere from beginning to end. The production design deserves additional appreciation because every location feels authentically lived in. Homes contain family photographs, books, unfinished projects, and personal belongings that quietly reveal information about the people living there. Offices appear functional rather than glamorous. Local businesses display small imperfections that make them believable. Nothing feels overly polished or artificially cinematic. Instead, the fictional town develops a convincing identity through countless small details. This realism allows viewers to become emotionally invested because Eddington feels like a place where real people have built their lives over many years. Costume design follows the same philosophy. Rather than dressing characters to make obvious symbolic statements, clothing reflects personality, occupation, and social background. Sheriff Joe Cross dresses practically, emphasizing years of professional experience. Mayor Ted Garcia maintains a more formal appearance appropriate for public leadership. Emma Stone's wardrobe quietly reflects emotional changes without drawing unnecessary attention. Even background characters wear clothing that suggest believable everyday lives. These subtle choices contribute to the film's immersive quality because nothing appears designed simply to impress the audience. Following its release, Eddington inspired countless video essays, podcasts, and detailed analyses exploring its symbolism and themes. Film students praised its visual storytelling, while psychologists discussed its portrayal of stress, fear, and group behavior. Political commentators interpreted its leadership conflicts through different ideological perspectives, often reaching completely different conclusions. This diversity of interpretation highlights one of the movie's greatest achievements. Rather than delivering a fixed message, it creates space for meaningful discussion. Each viewer brings personal experiences and beliefs to the story, resulting in unique emotional responses. Few modern films encourage this level of thoughtful engagement. One particularly interesting fact involves the film's title itself. While Eddington initially appears to refer only to the fictional town, many critics have argued that it eventually becomes a symbol representing countless communities facing similar challenges. The town serves as a microcosm of larger social divisions, demonstrating how national issues ultimately affect individual neighborhoods, friendships, and families. Because the setting remains fictional, audiences from different countries can still recognize familiar emotional patterns within the story. This universality helps explain why the film resonated with international viewers despite focusing on specifically American circumstances. Another fascinating detail is the movie's careful balance between realism and symbolism. Every major event functions on two levels simultaneously. On the surface, audiences watch a community struggling through an unprecedented crisis. Beneath that realistic narrative lies a broader exploration of trust, identity, leadership, communication, and human psychology. Ari Aster never interrupts the story to explain these themes directly. Instead, he trusts viewers to discover deeper meanings through observation. This confidence in the audience reflects mature filmmaking that values interpretation over instruction. As time passes, Eddington may become one of those films remembered less for individual plot twists and more for the emotional experience it creates. Viewers often struggle to summarize the movie because its greatest impact comes from atmosphere rather than isolated scenes. It captures a feeling, a mixture of uncertainty, anxiety, frustration, compassion, and hope that defined an extraordinary historical period. By focusing on emotional truth instead of sensational drama, Ari Aster creates a work that continues inviting reflection long after the final credits have finished. Perhaps that is the movie's most remarkable achievement. It reminds us that societies are built upon relationships between ordinary people. Communities survive not because everyone shares identical opinions, but because individuals continue listening, questioning, learning, and communicating even during disagreement. When those connections weaken, fear quickly fills the empty space. Through the fictional town of Eddington, Ari Aster encourages audiences to consider how fragile trust can become and how important empathy remains during moments of uncertainty. Rather than offering easy solutions, the film leaves viewers with meaningful questions. Questions about responsibility, leadership, truth, compassion, and the choices each person makes when confronted by fear. Those questions ensure that Eddington remains far more than simply another movie. It becomes an experience that continues living in the minds of its audience long after they leave the theater. As audiences continued revisiting Eddington, many began noticing details that were easy to miss during the first viewing. Like many of Ari Aster's films, this movie rewards patience and careful observation. Small background moments that initially seem unimportant gradually reveal their significance. A passing conversation, a brief glance between two characters, a news report playing quietly on a television, or even the placement of certain objects inside a room can take on completely different meanings once the audience understands the emotional journey of the characters. This layered storytelling is one reason the film encourages repeat viewings. Instead of relying on one shocking twist, Eddington builds its emotional impact through dozens of carefully planted details that slowly connect together. One of the film's strongest themes is the difference between truth and perception. Throughout the story, characters often believe they understand a situation, only to discover that they have been viewing events from an incomplete perspective. Ari Aster avoids suggesting that any single person possesses the complete truth. Instead, every character sees only one part of a much larger picture. Sheriff Joe Cross understands certain realities that the mayor cannot see. Mayor Ted Garcia recognizes challenges that ordinary citizens never experience. Local residents each witness different pieces of the growing crisis. As these separate viewpoints collide, misunderstandings become almost unavoidable. This narrative structure encourages viewers to question their own assumptions. Instead of immediately deciding who is right or wrong, the audience learns to consider multiple perspectives before reaching conclusions. The emotional strength of Eddington also comes from its refusal to portray people as entirely good or entirely bad. Every major character carries both admirable qualities and significant flaws. Sheriff Joe Cross displays courage and dedication but also struggles with stubbornness and emotional isolation. Mayor Ted Garcia genuinely wants to protect the community Yet, political pressure sometimes influences his judgment. Emma Stone's character demonstrates compassion while also experiencing moments of uncertainty and frustration. Even minor characters behave inconsistently because that is how real people often respond during stressful situations. Ari Aster reminds viewers that human beings are complicated. Most individuals believe they are doing the right thing, even when their decisions unintentionally create suffering for others. This realistic portrayal makes the emotional conflicts feel much more powerful than traditional stories built around simple heroes and villains. Another fascinating element is the way the movie explores fear as a contagious emotion. Throughout history, fear has spread through communities just as quickly as hope or optimism. Eddington illustrates this idea with remarkable subtlety. One person's anxiety influences another person's behavior, creating a chain reaction that gradually transforms the entire town. Rumors become accepted facts because frightened people desperately search for certainty. Ordinary disagreements become personal conflicts because emotional stress reduces patience and understanding. Ori Aster suggests that fear itself is not the true enemy. Fear is a natural human response. The greater danger comes when fear replaces communication, empathy, and critical thinking. This message gives the film lasting relevance because every generation experiences moments when uncertainty challenges social trust. From a technical perspective, the editing continues demonstrating extraordinary discipline. Many filmmakers would have been tempted to increase the pace during emotionally intense moments. Ari Aster chooses restraint instead. Important scenes often continue several seconds longer than audiences expect, allowing viewers to observe subtle emotional reactions after conversations end. These quiet moments reveal as much about the characters as the dialogue itself. A disappointed expression, a hesitant glance, or a deep breath often communicates emotions that words cannot express. This patient approach creates a realistic rhythm rarely seen in modern cinema, where rapid editing frequently dominates storytelling. The cinematography by Darius Konji remains equally impressive throughout the film. Every composition appears carefully designed without ever feeling artificial. Wide shots emphasize the physical isolation of the town within the New Mexico landscape, while intimate close ups allow audiences to experience personal emotional struggles. One recurring visual technique involves placing characters at opposite sides of the frame, symbolizing emotional distance even when they occupy the same physical space. This visual storytelling quietly reinforces the screenplay's themes without drawing unnecessary attention to itself. Viewers may not consciously notice every composition during their first viewing, but the emotional effect remains undeniable. Lighting continues evolving alongside the emotional narrative. Early scenes contain a balanced visual warmth that reflects the town's apparent normality despite underlying tensions. As conflicts become more severe, the color palette gradually shifts toward cooler, more restrained tones. Yet Ari Aster never relies on exaggerated darkness to create suspense. Many of the film's most emotionally devastating scenes occur under bright sunlight. This creative decision reinforces one of the movie's central ideas. Life's greatest conflicts often emerge during ordinary moments rather than dramatic cinematic settings. Everyday reality becomes the true source of emotional intensity. The production design deserves even greater appreciation upon closer examination. Every location feels authentic because it contains evidence of ordinary life. Family photographs suggest shared histories. Office spaces reflect professional responsibilities. Local businesses display signs of daily routines interrupted by extraordinary circumstances. These environmental details quietly communicate information about the characters without requiring explicit explanation. Instead of telling audiences about people's lives through dialogue, the movie allows surroundings to reveal personality, history, and emotional state. This confidence in visual storytelling reflects Erica Astor's commitment to cinematic rather than purely verbal communication. The score, composed by Bobby Kurlick and Daniel Pemberton, remains one of the film's most underrated achievements. Rather than composing memorable themes designed to dominate attention, they create emotional textures that support the psychological atmosphere. Soft electronic sounds merge with orchestral elements to produce music that often feels almost invisible during first viewing. Yet, removing this score would dramatically change the emotional experience. The composers understand that the best film music often works beneath conscious awareness, shaping emotional responses without distracting from performances. Their collaboration with Ari Aster continues demonstrating remarkable artistic harmony developed through previous projects. Another reason Eddington generated extensive discussion involves its refusal to simplify contemporary issues. Instead of offering political slogans or obvious moral lessons, the film focuses on human behavior under pressure. Regardless of personal beliefs, every viewer can recognize emotions such as uncertainty, frustration, loneliness, hope, pride, regret, and compassion. By concentrating on universal emotional experiences rather than ideological arguments, Ari Aster creates a story capable of resonating with audiences from many different backgrounds. This emotional accessibility explains why discussions surrounding the film extended far beyond traditional film criticism into psychology, sociology, media studies, and political science. One particularly interesting fact concerns audience reactions after screenings. Many viewers reported that conversations continued for hours after leaving the theater. Rather than immediately agreeing on the film's meaning, friends often discovered they had interpreted the same scenes very differently. Some sympathized primarily with Sheriff Joe Cross, while others understood Mayor Ted Garcia's difficult position more deeply. Many found themselves changing opinions several times while discussing the story with others. This ongoing debate became part of the overall experience. Instead of ending when the credits rolled, Eddington continued evolving through conversations between viewers. Few films achieve this level of lasting engagement. Critics also praised Ari Aster's willingness to challenge himself creatively. After establishing a reputation through horror films like Hereditary and Midsommar, he could easily have continued repeating successful formulas. Instead, Eddington demonstrates his determination to explore new storytelling territory. Although traces of psychological horror remain present within the emotional atmosphere, the film expands into political satire, Western imagery, social commentary, and intimate character drama. This artistic ambition may divide audiences, but it also prevents Ari Aster from becoming predictable. Great filmmakers often take creative risks, and Eddington represents one of his boldest experiments to date. Looking toward the future, many film historians may eventually view Eddington as an important cinematic document reflecting the emotional climate of the early 2020s. Rather than functioning as a literal historical recreation, it captures something deeper, the psychological experience of living through uncertainty. Years from now, audiences may watch the film not only to remember specific events but also to understand how those events felt emotionally. Cinema possesses a unique ability to preserve emotional history, and Eddington succeeds remarkably well in capturing an atmosphere of confusion, isolation, division, and cautious hope. Ultimately, the film leaves viewers with an important reminder. Communities are built through trust, communication, and empathy. These qualities require constant effort, especially during moments of fear and disagreement. When people stop listening to one another, misunderstanding quickly fills the silence. Through its fictional town, Eddington explores this fragile balance with intelligence, compassion, and remarkable emotional honesty. It is not simply a story about one sheriff, one mayor, or one community. It is a reflection on human nature itself, our strengths, our weaknesses, and our endless struggle to remain connected even when the world around us feels uncertain. That timeless message ensures that Eddington will continue inspiring discussion long after its initial release, securing its place as one of the most thought provoking films of 2025.